Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with the Grugq for another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, fine, and yourself?
I'm very well. This week's edition is brought to you by Corelight. Corelight makes an open network detection and response platform, and you can find them at corelight.com. So I'm looking at this, I guess it's a tweet, and it's based on Mandiant, now Google's threat intelligence group. So they have this report out. Unfortunately, it's not public, but there's a tweet and it's got a graph that's just plucked out of the report. And it's the historical time to exploit timeline is the title. And I'll just explain. Time to exploit is Google's metric for defining the average number of days taken to exploit a vulnerability before or after a patch is released. So, for example, if a patch is released and it's exploited maliciously in the wild, a week later, the TTE would be 7. Now, conversely, if it's exploited maliciously in the wild a week before a patch is released, the TTE would be -7. And so the dramatic part of this chart is that the TTE over the last 4 years, up till 2024, has gone from 63 days. So that means that 5 years ago, a patch was released, and on average, the first exploitation occurred within 6 weeks, or around 6 weeks. And now, in 2024, the first exploitation, on average, occurs the day before a patch is released. So this seems like a significant shift.
You say that, and yet somehow, like if you look at the top 5 bugs being exploited by ransomware groups against enterprise targets, they all come from this era of 32 to 5 days. Right, like they're still being exploited, but they were patched in like 2022.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm a little bit hesitant to say that this is a useful metric, just in the sense that like it might be negative 1 days for the average time to exploit, but it's going to be exploited for the next 5 years.
Right. Yep.
So does 5 years and 1 day matter quite as much as like 4 years and 11 months?
Yeah, so when I first came across this metric, I was a bit bemused by it, and a friend rang me up, and the first thing he said to me was, what you've got to understand about cybersecurity metrics, or metrics produced by cybersecurity vendors, is that they're made up for marketing purposes. so Google's come across
Tom,
this metric.
Would you say you are? That is a wild claim. I hope you have some evidence to back that up. That feels.
And so this is a great metric because it gets worse, and it's getting dramatically worse. And so this is a reason to go talk to your customers. There's that sort of dissonance where the most exploited bugs are not the most recent ones necessarily.
Right. I think that there's another problem I have with this, which is that doesn't seem to match with what we saw for 2024, right? Like this is the year that this covers is 2024.
Yep.
And I certainly don't remember that the majority of exploitations was being done with O-Day at that point.
Right. So, I mean, the sort of nuance is it's the first known exploitation that's malicious. So it's not necessarily the majority. Like it feels like it could be misleading because you think it means one thing, and then like when you dive into it, it actually means something else.
So it's just the very, very first time that they've seen this exploited, as opposed to right. So it's the first data point that they can get on this. Yep. Which doesn't necessarily correlate to the volume of attacks.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
I went and looked at Google's O-Day report, In fact, we both went and looked at it after reading this. And that report for 2024 is very much business as usual. There's O days. People are finding them.
I think it had 70 something for that year, for 2024. Like it was 70, 75, whatever. It's
there were incremental shifts. There was a bit more focus on enterprise products. Commercial surveillance vendors were finding a few more. It wasn't revolutionary.
It wasn't a sea change. There wasn't a huge shift of like, the first year we did this, we found 3, and only 2 years later, now there's 3,000.
That's right. Yeah. So the 0-day report, not good marketing. This report, good marketing. Now, the other thing that occurs is that this could just be a symptom of better detection, right? So they're finding...
Yeah. So I very much feel that if you're looking at... because if you look at the data buckets they've got like 2018, 2019, et cetera, et cetera. 2018 versus 2024 detection. I'm not exactly sure it's night and day, but it's pretty close. Like that is like 7 years is a significant period. That's a lot of.
It's twilight versus midday, if not night and day.
So it feels to me like that could be a collection bias, a collection error. That it's your collection has improved, and so you feel like you have. You feel like the trend has changed rather than your data set has improved.
Right, yeah. So based on this tweet, Brian in Pittsburgh, who's, I find quite an insightful Twitter account. I don't know who's behind it.
Brian? He's in Pittsburgh.
Presumably, but I don't know. He's riffed off that and noted that there's now a number of mass exploitation efforts that use 0 days. And you disagreed. And I was thinking about, the ones I could think of were Microsoft Exchange in 2000 and late 2020, 21? I think it was. Early 21, maybe?
It was like, I think it was January of 21.
Yep. There was the recent SharePoint thing, which was just a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And then there was a Barracuda email campaign, which was 23, I think. I wrote it down somewhere a little while ago. But that's not actually a huge number.
No. I mean, and I'd say that if you're super generous, you could maybe say, like, WannaCry, even though it was after the patch came out.
Right.
It was only like a couple months or something. And then NotPetya also exploited that. So that was a mass exploitation. But again, it wasn't a 0 day. And those were worms, which I think is a crucial difference.
Yeah, I think of those as different because they weren't really about espionage. The other one I was thinking of actually were Klopp, the ransomware gang, who had a series of, I guess, mass campaigns against... Right.
That was in like 21, 22, 23.
Enterprise edge devices.
Yeah.
And so they found, they could just go exploit everything and they could make money out of it. So it made sense to just go hell for leather.
Right. Okay, so I think that there's a core commonality to these incidents, which is very important. Right? So you've got Klopp going after enterprise systems that are exposed to the internet, but also tightly integrated into the core network.
I think in all those cases, they had valuable business data, and what they were doing was stealing it and then just extorting the companies. So they could immediately get on box and suck up whatever.
So, like there was they were going after like file access software, which is like a genre of software I didn't know existed until these guys started exploiting it. I mean, I use SSH and SCP and stuff, so I'm obviously not the target market for this sort of software. But like, what was interesting with them was that they were paying for exploits against the specific software that was of value to them. right? Like they'd identified that this would be useful. They were going to pay money for anyone who could give them O-Day for it, and then they exploited that O-Day, and they got money. So it was a very tight loop of like, this is a thing that will give us access to valuable data that we can then exploit for money. I think it's similar with the Exchange bug, right? Like if you get on Exchange, if you're doing intelligence collection, you're probably going to hack somewhere to get access to their email. There'll be other things, of course, but email is going to be very, very valuable.
Yep.
So if you can just get onto the email,
you're on the high ground already.
Yeah.
You've pretty much achieved 90% of your goal.
Right. You've got
swoop.
exactly what you want. I think it's similar with SharePoint, right? Like it's a file server. It's going to have files that you want. So it's immediately valuable. And so I think if you look at this, the commonality with this mass exploitation of O-Days in all the cases we've seen so far is it's mass exploitation of O-Days that get you gold immediately.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. It's the 0 to 60 is exactly one hop. Right. Like it gets you all the way there on the first try, as opposed to something that will get you access that you then need to pivot, you then need to sort of expand, hop somewhere else, do lateral. Like you don't. There's no grunt work left.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And
there's no
the Exchange and SharePoint. It wasn't mass exploitation either until it was clear that there was a patch coming out.
Right.
So it seems like it was, I don't know, this is a hypothesis. Maybe it was driven by better detection in that it gets detected. Somehow they had intelligence or knew that a patch was coming out. And so at that point, you're like, there's gold and then there are hills. Let's go out and get it right now.
Yeah. So it was from the map. Like the Microsoft
Advanced Protection Program.
Yeah, right. So it was, here's a thing we're going to patch in 2 days, and you should have detections for it or whatever. And so from the point of that announcement going out, suddenly all of the exploitation started. So there was this, like they knew a patch was coming, and they just did a land grab to get everything they could while the getting was good. And,
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because, as we said, like it gets you immediately where you want to be.
So that dynamic, again, it could be driven by better detection. And so maybe that's being overly optimistic.
No, I think that sort of incident probably happened before, but it seems to me like this is a very direct line from if you exploit this everywhere, you can get value from it basically as soon as the exploit is finished running. Using the capability allows you to exploit that resource immediately. So the capability will give you access to SharePoint. That can be exploited immediately, right? If you have a capability that gives you access to a web server in a DMZ, you still have to do a lot of work before you can exploit that access. You still have to go from that DMZ into the network and then find the SharePoint or the file server or the email server or whatever, and then exploit it there, right? So there's a lot of work left to do. And so having a mass collection of access to these DMZ servers doesn't get you much closer than not having that access.
Right. The other thing you said before, which I think was interesting, was the mass use of O-Day used to be pretty common.
Yeah. So back when O-Day was sort of free, so up until I think maybe 2008, 2010 even, I mean, this was the era where you could literally sit down on a Friday afternoon, find a bug, write an exploit, and then spend the weekend exploiting it. Right? Like you could basically do that. So I remember for the first pwn to own, I think it was K2 and Dino, but don't quote me on that. My recollection was that they showed up, they found out that there was going to be a pwn to own the next day, so they sat down, They found they found a vulnerability, they wrote an exploit, and then they won the competition the next day. Right? Like, that's not a thing you do anymore. Right? These days, pwn to own is multiple months of work to get ready. And so in an era where it was like, yeah, you could show up the day before, find the vulnerability, write the exploit, and then use it. And then you could discard it because you don't need it again. Yeah, doing like mass exploitation was a thing just because the time investment to get that O-Day was so low.
Right.
That
right. I guess the chances of getting pinged were also probably lower as well. So that it was just happy days, maybe.
I mean, the other thing is that they lasted very, very long. Right. Like, I've seen archival exploits where people would be. You could see that it was like written in 2006, updated in 2007, 2009, 10, 12, 13, 15, patched in 2018, right? And it'd be like, that is, like, you just have this amazing longevity of exploits.
I'm just thinking in my head that there's this period of cheap O-Day, poor detection, and so they're just used widely.
Right.
Then we reach an era of more expensive O-Day, moderate detection, and so they're used cautiously, and they kind of disappear as a thing that is used en masse. And now people are thinking O-Day is expensive, but detection is also good. So as soon as you get pinged, you've invested all this time and money and effort, and so you just want to get the most return you can. And so if you can just push it out as far as you can and get seize as much high ground or mine as much gold as you can, like, that's the way to get your return on investment, even though it's been driven by improvements in detection and maybe even patching, maybe.
Yeah. So that last thing that you said strikes me as maybe an important point here, is that for most of the bugs that are getting exploited, they are multiple years old. You know, there's a new report that came out on the top bugs being exploited by Russia in Ukraine, and they, the headline is, Russia using zero-click exploits against email. Sounds kind of scary. And then you look it up, and it's like round cube webmail vulnerabilities that were patched in like 2022 or 2023. Yeah, it kind of feels like that shouldn't be the headline, that they're using these zero-click exploits. The headline should be like, people still haven't patched, even though there's been a war on for the entire time.
Yeah, so I wonder if part of the dynamic is that the organizations that are really good targets for the type of people who could use O-Day like that, like Exchange or SharePoint, they are organizations that patch relatively quickly when there's an imminent threat, and so all the good stuff goes pretty quickly. It's like it's like going to the local charity shop. Like, if you're not there when it opens, all the good stuff's gone. And you can turn up later and get stuff for cheap. Yeah. It's not the good stuff though.
Right, like it's not empty when you show up later. It's just the $20 designer handbag got snatched up in the morning, and
that's right. Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of feel that the dynamic that was going on with the Exchange land grab was that it's not so much that they believed every exchange that they were hitting was going to be valuable. It's just that they farmed out the work to so many people, and it was very much a, collect them all, sort them out afterwards.
Yep.
And I think that it was because that they knew that there would be a high percentage of valuable boxes that they had that they could then exploit afterwards for intelligence collection. Like, they knew the bug was dead, so they were willing to just sort of take the risk of that mass exploitation. And I assume SharePoint fell into a sort of similar thing. And I think it's an unusual set of circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
where you have like an O day and it's immediately valuable and it's probably going to be patched at the people that you want it, that you'll want to use it against.
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yep.
therefore, you're better off just getting as much as you can right now.
Yep.
And then figuring it out afterwards. It's the very much, hack-em-all.
Yeah, it feels like the last seconds of a football match and go for a Hail Mary to translate for our American listeners.
For me, the problem is I keep thinking of it was during the massacre of Magdeburg in the 30 Years' War, where the bishop says, kill them all, God will know his own. Where they were like, should we kill the Catholics and the Protestants, or just the Protestants, or just the Catholics? And he's like, kill them all, God will know his own.
Right.
That's what it feels like to me, is that there's this whole it's not my problem, just go for it.
Yeah, so that means that those mass exploitation events, even though they feel common, are actually rather unusual because they're that confluence.
Yeah, they're going to remain rare and exceptional just because you need a lot of stars to align for it to make sense. Right? It's not just access to O-Day. That's not sufficient for this sort of event to take place. I think the dynamic would be different if the O-Day was publicly available. Then you'd have people exploiting it who weren't thinking about the value that they could get from it. Like they wouldn't. So like an intelligence agency is making a calculated decision about how they're going to use this resource that they have. And it's going to be directed and purposeful, and they have a mission that they're trying to accomplish. And for them, that mission lining up with all of these variables is that's going to be a rare occasion when it does happen. Whereas I think if you just open it up to like everyone on the internet, there's just enough dumb people who just want to exploit for exploiting's sake.
Right, yep. Especially if there's good proof of concept code around on the internet for people to just pick up and use.
And I think even more so, if the capability gives you something useful in a way that you can, maybe you can deface it, or maybe you can use it as a bounce server, or maybe you can use it for anything, that it gives you some sort of thing that you can exploit immediately. So for an intelligence agency, there's a fairly high bar for exploiting something. Right? You're looking for real data that you can use. For a ransomware group, I'm going to say it's a reasonably high bar as well. Like you need to be able to get access to something that's valuable to someone to exploit it. But if you're just like some random Joe Schmo kid on the internet, I think that the bar is quite low, because simply having access to a box is in itself a reward.
The journey is the destination.
Right.
Whereas for state-backed hackers, the journey is just a job.
Right. Yeah. Can you imagine that, like, you love hacking and so you become like a government hacker? Probably hate hacking.
You replace what you love with bureaucracy and performance reviews.
Yeah, OKRs. I think, in a way, what this time to exploit metric, it feels a little bit like p-hacking with these, like those dubious science papers,
right,
where they run an experiment and the results just are sort of inconclusive. So they look through and they try different sets of variables until they can find some sort of correlation that has a good p-value.
Right, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
Probability of being significant or something. What is it, 0.05 or...
Yeah, I think something like this, right? It's where it would be like the odds of this being a coincidence are, astronomically low. And that's true, but it's because you've tried everything until you found the one coincidence.
Right, yep.
I'm not suggesting that this is exactly that style of mucking about, but that's sort of what it feels like, is that...
Right.
You
think they've...
You mess around with different things until you can find like the one trend that looks right,
Right, you think they've stumbled across the perfect cybersecurity metric?
Yeah, well, I think that they've just got so much data that you could look through it until you find something that, that matches the narrative you're trying to present.
Right. And I guess my hypothesis is that this is all driven by better detection. And so, in fact, you doing a better job actually makes the problem look worse. And so this is the perfect metric.
There you go. Like, there's one way of showing that the crime statistics have gone down, and that's to fire all the police and stop collecting statistics. And the other way is to do really good policing. But I think there's this in-between stage where your policing is good enough that you're catching a large number of detected crimes, that it looks worse than either of the other extremes. Right? And I think that we're probably in that middle bit where we're getting better at detecting things going wrong, and we're getting better at catching incidents.
Right.
And so
next year we can hope that the number's even worse.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Grugq.